episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Zach here, and as always, Matt, how you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Kind of catching up from some of the road travel this past week. Did a walk around of Tinley on Friday, and just trying to play a little bit of catch up now within the home collection and situating up for another week on the road.
Yeah, we've both been on the road quite a bit. I was home last week, but the week before was our spring break, and I, with a handful of students, headed down to help some of my grad students working on a crayfish project in South Carolina. And I thought, well, if we're going to South Carolina, we might as well drive to Florida. So we kept on going south, and had it in my head that we could maybe do a project with Floridana, the Florida Kingsnake, if we could find enough of them. So we went to the cane fields, put our time in, and found one alive, one dead on the road. And in the meantime of looking for the Florida Kings, found so many Nerodia. And we all know I love my Nerodia. And that got me to thinking that it would be so much better if we just made the focal species of this potential master's thesis Florida water snakes instead of Florida king snakes, because we were road cruising and averaged anywhere from like as few as 5 to as many as 10, 15 a night, and really wasn't putting in the effort. So it's a great week in Florida. Also got my lifer crocodile. Kind of cheated. I went to Flamingo in the Everglades where everybody gets their lifer American crocodile. But still, well worth it. It was good to get out in the field. Good to see some snakes. And as everybody's about to learn, today's episode has a lot of herping in it. So 'tis the season to start that, and we're going to keep that ball rolling. But I have a couple announcements. I noticed that our previous guest may have sent you a box, Matt.
Oh, yeah.
Did that happen?
It did. So Mike was kind of teasing me because of not sending him a box. So we ended up doing a final exchange here. So Mike got some interesting colubrids himself, some of the things he's been waiting on, including a pair of Cape files. And I ended up picking up 7 Grabowski that were captive born in Mike's collection. So, and I don't know if they're Grabowski. I don't know what they are, but they sure like to bluff.
They like to bluff.
So it'll be interesting to see these animals develop and change, in the time, because that was part of, my real justification or reasoning behind having them was pictures really don't do justice of the animals. And I also wanted to see how the animals interacted, see how they developed, and feeding behavior, breeding behavior, because I think it makes a much larger statement related to the animals themselves.
Nice. So no matter what they are, how many different forms of Teinuria does this make in your that you've had experience keeping? I have 2.
About 5.
Damn.
5. Yeah. So, and that's not even including the 2 different localities of Ridley too as well.
Excellent. So everything's out of Brumation for me. I'm assuming most things, if not all, are out for you. Is that correct?
That is correct, and have seen multiple locks already for the year.
Nice. So I just started putting my stuff together. The hogs are going nuts, as they should be. Some Pitchophis and some Pantherophis activity. But as everybody knows, I have all these king snakes, and I brought the kings out, and I put them all together. It's all Getula stuff. And then they just keep, staring at each other. And then I'm sitting there thinking, you're going to eat each other? You're going to mate with each other? What the hell's going on? So waiting for those sheds to hit. The only kings that have definitely locked, and they've locked multiple times, are the Outer Banks kings, formerly known as Sticticeps. Should be getting those. But I have yet to see any kind of activity other than cuddling with the 20 plus however many I have. I actually don't know. Florida Kings. But I've been talking to some people, Scott McFarlane, Jen Archer, and they just keep telling me, be patient. It's not immediate. So it goes to show that you can have all the experience in the world with these weird exotic things like my South American Dipsadids, And then I put these beginner snakes together, and they're driving me crazy because there's like nothing going on. But no, we shall soon see what goes on that front. And then I had my first clutch of eggs. A little bit unexpected. Bred all the false water cobras, as I said before. And normally the way that works is I put them all together the first week of the year. And then I usually get eggs last week of March, first week of April. I think they ovulate well after copulation normally. And first time mom surprised all of us. I got back from spring break. I think it was the Sunday that I got back. I got a panicked message from the students at school saying, "What the hell do we do with these?" And there was a picture of eggs in an egg box. And I was like, all right, we're off to the races early this year. So 24 fertile false water cobra eggs from a first-time mom. No slugs. You can't ask for anything better than that. So good to go on that front. Have you had eggs yet or just breeding?
No eggs yet. About to have 2 clutches of cock's eye eggs laid, as both females are in their nest box. And poultry are still breeding, but in terms of eggs for the season, no, it's been pretty quiet so far. But Zach, we're only in the middle stages.
I know that.
Come on,
I'm a little bit like, holy shit, we already have eggs. So I'm not used to this. I'm used to like May, June, of course, being the insane time. So, anywho, alrighty. Well, I'm ready to get going. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's jump into this.
Okay, so our guest today is Daniel Lawrence. Daniel is from California, and his name was given to us because we always ask people to reach out and tell us what you want and in episodes. And one of our listeners basically said, "Hey, I know this guy. He's all about locality California Kingsnakes. You're showing a lot of the East Coasters love. What about us out here on the West Coast? And you ask and you shall receive." That's the way our podcast rolls. So reached out to Dan. Dan and I were you may recall I mentioned before our last episode that we had some technical difficulties. That was Dan and I trying to get this thing to roll. Turns out we need Matt. Matt is the magic bullet to make this whole thing work technologically, because I know, at least for me, I'm an analog dinosaur. Would much rather be out in the forest flipping rocks and logs than sitting in front of a computer screen. But we got it working, and so we have Dan with us today. How you doing, man?
Doing good. Glad to be here. And yeah, some of those technical difficulties were my dinosaur computer system as well, which I needed to upgrade it anyway, so it was perfect timing. So yeah, glad to be here and finally be able to, make the connection here.
Yes. So with that being said, today's episode is going to be a little bit unique. Normally we're very husbandry focused, but the main thrust behind this is Dan keeps California Kingsnakes and Rosie boas, but we're going to focus mainly on the Cali Kings today. And Dan is a locality Cali King guy. So today's episode is going to be about herping and keeping, and how those two disciplines kind of marry together to make for what I might argue the ultimate herpetocultural experience. So with that being said, I'm going to steal Matt's question because I'm just kind of rolling. But what was your start with reptiles, and how long have you been doing this whole herpetoculture thing, Dan?
Okay, let's see. So, I grew up in Torrance, which is just south of Los Angeles, if anyone's sort of familiar with that. But you can kind of picture just between Los Angeles and Long Beach, for people that aren't from the state there. Basically, I grew up basically in the middle of like a suburban urban area, so there wasn't a whole lot as far as herping, net to per se right outside my doorstep. But just by chance, there was a little bit of urban wildlife and things that do live in Torrance. Right across the street from my house, where I grew up, there was fence lizards and gopher snakes.
Nice.
And that was one of my first sort of introductions into just seeing reptiles in the wild, and as a kid just thinking, wow, that's something that's kind of cool, kind of interesting. And I was always that kid that was like into dinosaurs and that type of a thing, and that kind of fit in there. But also, I'll mention my grandparents were a big part in that too. My grandmother actually just passed away a couple weeks ago, and they were retired for many years, and they had a home up in Tehachapi, California, and they had another home out in Palm Desert. And I used to play in the hills and in the areas around both of their homes as a kid, and that was where I found other species of reptiles, and things like Gilbert skinks, and occasionally would see other snakes. You'd see your first rattlesnake, and so it was kind of just as a kid growing up sort of in a Southern California is not a bad place to grow up, to be potentially exposed to herpetology and that kind of a thing. And I had grandparents and parents that took me out places. We went to the Eastern Sierra, we went out to the desert, and I had parents that were sort of into that thing, into just knowing a little bit more about what you're looking at instead of just driving right by it. So that was kind of where it started. And basically, I did as a young kid, I developed basically a fascination with reptiles. So I would deliberately go down to the park across the street from my house, and I would look for gopher snakes, and I'd rarely ever find one because at 10 years old, you just didn't quite know what you were doing. You'd be out on an 80-degree day or something like that, or in the middle of July or whatever. But occasionally you'd find a gopher snake, and I could always catch alligator lizards, and we had alligator lizards, of course, as well. Forgot about those, but fence lizards, and like I said, as you go on trips with your parents around places, every once in a while you'd find something really cool. You'd find a horned toad or something, and that would just spark your interest even more. And then I remember at a certain age, you'd open up that field guide. You got that first Autobahn. We called it like the Bible because it looked like the little Bible, and you'd see the Rosie boa, and you'd see the California kingsnake, and you'd see they had a picture of a striped one in there, and and as a kid, you just really wondered about that. And so it's just something that progressed through high school. We had a couple friends that worked at a couple reptile shops. There was some really prominent reptile shops in the area that some people might remember. There was Hermosa Pet when I was a kid, that was down at Hermosa Beach, and that's I don't know if that's the shop that Lloyd Lemke ran, but there was all those people were around in the area at that time when I was much younger. But later on, when as I was growing up, there was other reptile shops over in Lomita, and other friends of mine that would work at some of these shops, and occasionally you'd hear a mentioning about somebody caught a king snake over here, and that was kind of right about the time that the Field Herp Forum was starting up in like 2005. And I think the kind of the King Snake Forum was kind of before that, and we were in like our early 20s, just getting out of high school, and we started seeing these other guys. Brian Hubbs was one of those guys, and Ross Padilla, if people are familiar with him, and he's online, and but they were putting up pictures of finding these really cool king snakes occasionally in Los Angeles, in what appeared to be basically the neighborhood we grew up in. It was just the same, and we just, as soon as we saw that, it was me and a good friend of mine, and we just, we had to be part of that. So that's kind of how I got into at least the urban thing, and around the same time we got into Rosie boas, and that's a whole nother story altogether. But that's pretty much it, and it's been something I've been a lifelong thing till now. I'm 37 years old, so it's been I think I've got almost 20 years of seeking reptiles and learning about them in the wild, and it definitely takes it's a long learning process. We all learn at different rates and everything, but yeah, it's basically basically how I've gotten into it till now. And the Los Angeles thing is something that I found that very few people were specializing in, and it just happened to be that I lived in the perfect place. So we decided to specialize in that, and that's worked out good.
So Daniel, you kind of mentioned a couple of things that, different species that you saw not only in the field from your grandparents and family members, locations, pet stores in terms of pet availability. So what kind of drove you into California king snakes as more or less your specialty in your personal collection?
Well, so for me, I became really interested in the diversity that I have right here in like the state of California, mainly Southern California, and the diversity that we have in especially like the southwestern United States, where we have basically it's what most would interpret, we have a lot of exotic species that are reaching their northern limits of their range in that part of the United States. The Cal King obviously ranges quite a bit further north, but you have like the Rosie boa and a few other species, the lyre snake. So you basically have a few species that are really interesting. Not to say that other snakes aren't that interesting, but you have like ringneck snakes and garter snakes and even gopher snakes, which are very interesting amongst themselves. But as we were, as we're learning about snakes and figuring out where we want to go and look for them, we're also thinking about what are the top snakes on our list. And so if you're in Southern California, it's basically a zonata for most people. Some people it's a zonata, some people it's a Rosie boa of some kind, of some locality, or it's a Cal King of some nice looking Cal King, maybe a Morph or something like that. Those are probably the top three things. Some people are some people are out there to find speckled rattlesnakes and other things, but really when you're looking at the snakes that people would want to collect that make a good pet, or but that's just what we gravitated towards was Rosie boas, zonata, and then obviously Cal Kings. And then when you look at the fact that these morphs exist, which you look at it, just a normal banded Cal King, really, there's a fairly run-of-the-mill Cal King that you can find in the middle of LA that could look just like a Cal King that you could catch up near Sacramento. For all intensive purposes, there are still differences amongst them, but don't let me discount the banded ones because they're extremely unique. But then you got these morphs, which just make it even more interesting. So that's one of the reasons that I decided to gravitate towards this, because within especially like the Newport Long Beach morph, I saw early on a really vast range of pattern potentialities and different types of pattern marking characteristics and different. There's just a wide potential there in what you could produce with the snake or what you could just find in the wild. In my opinion, Los Angeles possibly could easily be one of the most diverse morph-wise areas for Cal Kings or even Getula as a whole. So that's kind of one of the reasons I gravitated towards that, because there really is a lot there. And then it's something that it's also very hard to do. You go to other counties like San Diego, even Orange County, but certainly San Diego, Riverside County. It's a little easier to locate not only kings in numbers, but to locate morphs. Not to say that anything's easy, but it's easier. It's something that more people have had success in doing. This LA thing, where I grew up, where I'm from, within the LA basin, it's it's more of a challenging thing. It's more of a niche thing. You really got to think outside the box. Then you don't find the numbers. So it's something that we thought we could gravitate towards. And you're going to hear me say we throughout the podcast. And it's a really good friend of mine who for all intents and purposes, he'd like to just remain anonymous because that's just been his thing for years. But those that are listening, they know exactly who I'm talking about. So I'll just mention that once. But I have a really good friend that I do a lot of my board lines and stuff with. But yeah, basically that's one reason that I gravitated towards Cal Kings, specifically Los Angeles County, urban LA Basin Cal Kings, because it's something that not everybody does, not everybody can do, or is, let's just say, willing to do, because it's certain, there's just a wide array of challenges that come with trying to find snakes in small pockets, small to medium-sized pockets in the city. So that's basically what gravitated me towards Cal Kings.
Cool.
Right on. Yeah, I was always a big fan of black and white Cal Kings. I remember having a bunch of them in graduate school too, and trying to get, multiple horseshoes on those animals. I know that's always been one of those things that was desirable, especially the double horseshoes on those animals.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I've kept the Jawbone Cal Kings, which are the local Kern County locality king. But there's a wide array of really nice black and white locality and non-locality stock out there that I've been interested in that for a long time too.
So Daniel, you mentioned one other thing. You mentioned a passion for Rosie boas.
Yes.
So what other localities of Rosie boas do you have within your collection? Obviously, within talking about other species of snakes that you keep.
So okay, so Rosie boa wise, I basically, the first locality I'll start with is the locality that's basically kind of my backyard, Soledad Canyon. So I keep basically a nice I keep a couple breeding pairs of Soledad Canyons at any given time, and it's basically a San Gabriel Rosie boa. If people are familiar with that it's basically a phenotype of Rosie boa that you find pretty much within the San Gabriel Mountains. And as you start to get to the northern end, kind of where I'm at, the Soledad Canyon has kind of a very specific kind of look. It's a narrower, more zigzaggy stripe, a lot of speckling, but they could also look more normal as well. But I keep the Soledad Canyons. I also keep Alpine, which is a San Diego locality. And I have some really dark gray and blue stock that we collected years ago to start that project. I have my Lake Havasu City Rosie boas, that's a locality that I basically sort of discovered the locality in 2012. It's the mountain range right behind Havasu City there, basically. So it's an Arizona locality. Kind of look a lot like Surbat or a Wallapai mountain boa, similar in look to that. So that's kind of another specialty locale, if you will. There's other people that keep them now, but that's one of my kind of signature localities. I'm working on getting some El Rosarios into production. Baja stuff I'm still kind of working on right now. I've kind of had stuff before and kind of gotten rid of it, but I'm working on getting some Baja stuff into production. I have some really nice Hypo Long Canyon stock that people really seem to be really stoked on. It's a really, some of the babies can be like a really bright orange, almost like a albino whitewater, but just not with the pink eye, and they're not an albino. They're just a really nice Hypo. And I'm working on getting some wild caught genetics bred back into that. And what else have I got? I have a pair of Corn Springs, of course, which that's one of the few low desert localities I've been able to find in the wild. I haven't had as much success out there as other people, but that's kind of the majority of my Rosie boa collection right now. I tend to try to get multiple pairs, so I kind of have a large collection going without too many locales right now. But I'm working on getting more stuff in the future. I think I'm going to work on getting the El Rosarios, some Colonnade Rosie boas. into production. I'm going to try breeding some Ajo Mexican Rosie boas in the future. It's just a matter of, doing breeder loans with people. But I should be breeding quite a few of them a little bit later this year here. A lot of my Rosie boas breed in May and June. A lot of my animals that we have here from Southern California. So yeah, it's a not a huge, extremely diverse locality wise, but I'm really enriching it by having like multiple females and holding on to different specimens that have a little bit different phenotypes and stuff going on. And so you can hold on to these different animals and try different breeding combinations. And there's not quite as much variability with, say, a Rosie boa as like a Kingsnake. But there is variability there. And we're starting to learn that those things can be bred out by isolating certain genes, and even doing like breed backs, which we used to kind of think we sort of thought it was a no-no, at least for myself, but we've tried that recently with some San Gabriel boas and gotten some really, really just bright orange, and that was how we got it for the first time, was breeding a baby back, to its mom. So
cool. So
yeah,
I think what we're going to do now is we're going to basically go through the process. We'll discuss the herping, and then we'll head on to the keeping and how you do that and breed and all that kind of good stuff. So first thing before we get into the actual field collection and the herping is, obviously we don't want to just be going out and collecting as many snakes as we see. There's an ethics part to this whole equation that all, what's the word I'm looking for? Legitimate field herpers have. So can you talk a little bit about what you have to do as far as the legality side of things is concerned before you go out and find an animal and bring it in to human care to begin a locality line? At least for California, obviously. Every state's different, but just talk a little bit about that process. So
like if you're a California resident and let's say you wanted to get into keeping one of the there's really, I think it's only like 4 snakes that are actually they allow you to breed. It's the glossy, it's a Rosie boa, glossy snake, I believe. It's the gopher and a king snake. I'm not quite sure on that 4th one, but let's say you wanted to breed to go out and collect a pair of king snakes and breed them. So you basically would have to get a freshwater fishing license to collect the snakes in the first place. The bag limit on the common king snake, the California king snake, is 4. So with a freshwater fishing license, you could go out and collect 4 of them. And that would be, it's a limit of 4 in possession. So basically you can interpret that different ways, but basically if they come to your home, if they find you, if they stop you out in the field, you can have no more than 4 on you. That are wild caught. Now, of course, at your home, you can have animals that you've purchased, from the pet trade. So to breed them, you have to contact Fish and Wildlife and apply for a California propagation permit. And which at that point you'll basically fill out some information on like the background of your animals and kind of what you intend to do and a little bit about what you're keeping there at your house collection wise, and you send in a fee, and basically if all the information checks out, they will send you a captive propagation permit. It's not a too difficult of a process. So those are basically the legal parameters with if you were someone that was interested, like a resident of California in breeding, say, Cal Kings or something, one of those 4 species.
All right, so we've done that. We're legal, all's well. We respect the process. Now we're herping. So talk a little bit about what it is to go find a Cali King. So like, I know a lot of people before they go herping, they have this assumption that you go out on a bright, sunny, hot summer day, because that's when snakes are active, and you're going to go flip rocks, and the snakes are just going to be slithering through the grass, and everything's going to be hunky-dory, and if you go out, you're guaranteed to find them, and then you're going to basically go home happy. And I know that there's a lot of people that think, oh, that's herping. And as a herper, I can attest to the fact that that's about as pie in the sky as you can possibly get. So I've done no herping in California. I know nothing about it. You're the expert. So just kind of divulge what this actually entails for someone who might be entertaining the idea of maybe becoming a locality person.
And just to start with that, I mean, honestly, we've all been through that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's where it starts for a lot of people. You see, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because we have that competitive aspect with it nowadays, but people have the ability to go online and find a lot of that information. If they're sharp enough type of person that can learn quickly, they can find a lot of that information online and not have that trial and error process of going out on the wrong day. But that's where a lot of it starts is learning the hard way and kind of that trial and error method. But as you start to actually learn what the proper time of year is, what a good day is, how to actually hunt these reptiles. So what does hunting for king snakes look like? It depends on what county in California that you're hunting in, but basically, it all there's a similar hunting method that's used, which is flipping. And I say flipping because we don't flip it over out of place, but we look underneath artificial cover, mm-hmm. which is boards and whatever else, tins, rocks, concrete, asphalt, anything that's flat and covering the ground. And that's all done basically in the California springtime, which I think comes a little earlier than other parts of the country. But basically, as you learn more and you get to that level where you fully understand every time of year that could possibly go out and find a king. I mean, you could on certain years when we get fall rains, you can start as early as October or possibly even late September, and there can be a little period where we get some fall rains, and you could have a couple weeks of activity where you're finding them under boards and things like that. You can find them certain years. We have just such a wide range of weather here in Southern California, especially along the coast. It just really varies certain years. So some years you're out like literally in December around Christmas time, and it's not like prime conditions, but you're able to like find a king or two under whatever, a board, a rock, something like that. But obviously, you get into the prime time of year, which is anywhere from usually kind of like beginning mid-March to kind of like the middle end of April, depending on the year. But basically this year, right around now is basically prime time. I actually, I'll have to admit, I found a couple of cow kings yesterday. I was down. I shouldn't even tell this story, but I was down for my grandmother's funeral yesterday, and we had the service at there's a cemetery over in like the San Pedro area, mm-hmm. and a buddy of mine was down in that area. We went over to Palos Verdes, and in between the service and the get together after I had about an hour and a half to kill. So I couldn't resist. I did throw on my hiking boots, but I was out there in a pair of slacks and a real nice shirt and tie. And my buddy had already found the first one, and then we walked over to another spot, and I got to flip the other one. But there was a couple kings up yesterday around the middle of the day, and it's extremely dry out there. We haven't had any rain since I think it was around Christmas time, kind of like the early January, any significant rain. And it was a significant rain that we got, but it's been several months since we've had any type of significant moisture. So it's extremely dry out there, but it's basically it's the right time of year. So so even though it's very dry out there, these snakes are still going to be coming up in the mornings and afternoons and crawling around. And if they either come up under a board or they find their way to a rock or a board, they're going to hang out for a little bit. And if you come along at the right time and turn said rock, you can get lucky, But that's basically what it looks like. You're in the springtime in Southern California. You're looking for really good grassy. If you're looking for cow kings, you're looking for really good grassy environments, which is all invasive European grasses that have been growing here for hundreds of years that we have in most of those kind of what I call disturbed habitats. And sometimes those disturbed habitats are the best areas to put boards in, because really the natural habitat for California is kind of like a sage scrub or a chaparral or a native kind of a bunch grass is what we had before. This part of the world was basically the European expansion, and that's what brought over these invasive grasses that we have they're much more like the African and Mediterranean grasses. And you have mustard, which is something that people will know about and they look for, which is it's all invasive types of grasses and things like that, but those are the areas that hold the moisture the best, and those are the areas where you want to try to put boards down and put them over rodent holes, or find other things that are already there, concrete and whatever, and just know of things that you can go turn. And then as you're hiking around, you're looking for anything that could be out on the crawl. And initially when I first started doing this, when we were younger, a lot of the animals we would just hike around and we would find, what you would see out on the crawl. And that, believe it or not, can be a fairly effective way on certain days, certain times a year. A good friend of mine, he's got a really good story. When he was younger, when we were just getting into this, he was working over at a Home Depot, and there was a guy there that was, just not really, I would say, a devout, guy that knew a lot about herpetology or anything like that, but he happened to be a guy that would go over to Palos Verdes and catch kingsnakes every once in a while, and he would catch them by hiking. And like I said, we were just kind of getting into it at the time. It was like right after high school, and my buddy, well, I'm going to go up. Let me go up there with you. And so they go up there with this guy, and I think the story was they hiked literally 3 of them in an afternoon, which is, it's not, nothing extraordinary, but it's an effect. It was effective, was what the point was. So there's different ways you could find them. If you know what type of weather that they like that makes them crawl out, which is a lot of it's like when you're close to the coast, it's like the marine layers. You got the marine layers coming in the morning and burning off. And then there's kind of a lot of times sometimes there'll be a warm part in the middle of the day, but a lot of times a marine layer or something will come in the afternoon as well. And they kind of, they like those pressure changes where the clouds kind of come back and forth and knock the sun down a little bit, but maybe it was allowed to kind of warm up a little bit that day. Or so there's different effective ways to look for cow kings, and it all depends on where you're at. Obviously, if you're out in the desert, flipping boards isn't going to be as effective,
On the board front, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about laying boards, flipping boards, maybe turning boards was what we should say, but we always say flipping. So, lifting boards. There we go.
Fun dad. Brian Hyde's always used the word lifting.
Yeah. And then the etiquette of what should you stumble onto someone's board line and you're going to, let's be real, most people are going to flip it. The whole etiquette of returning it back to the way it should be, and what should happen to the people that don't do that. So,
okay. So, right. And what was the first part of the question is just the in general, yeah. What was the first part again?
Making the assumption that people are listening that haven't necessarily gone herping before, just defining a board line, the importance of that to the endeavor and the etiquette of utilizing one that may not be your own.
Right. So basically, it just goes kind of right back to what I was just describing previously about how we hunt for king snakes. So let's say you're in any type of coastal environment in California. Let's say it's from Monterey to San Diego, and you have coastal grasslands that these king snakes are found in. So if somebody wants to go out and find that species that day, and like I said, you want to use that method that I did mention where you're just hiking and just looking for them, that's obviously something you can try, and it can be effective. But let's just face it, certain times of year, if there's a large array of flat objects out in a field, and everybody knows that from, I think, the East Coast to the West Coast, that can be an extremely productive way to find reptiles. So if said objects were not there whatsoever to begin with, let's just say it was a completely overgrown field with not a single object to turn, and then you have some people that take it upon themselves, right? Because they're willing to do the work or take the risk or whatever it really is, and set something out in a field. That's basically what you're looking at as far as the ethics, the morality of it. You have somebody else comes along and finds something else that, and people that are getting to this level, we all know what a board line is. But that's basically what a board line is something that, it's an array of objects. It could be boards, tins, anything really that somebody's put out. I would try to never place anything besides boards and tins, because just anything else is kind of just you're putting carpet or plastic into the environment, and
yeah.
The boards will end up disappearing, and the tins don't really hurt anything. Really, they but basically that's what it is a board line is something that somebody's placed out. If it's just one or two objects, it's kind of hard to really call it a board line or call it, but if you really set out an array and you put in some work, and it's something where somebody's put in some work, and especially if they've taken the time to hide it and to kind of put it in a place where it's out of sight. And then let's say you have somebody else that comes along, and they happen to find it. Well, it's one of those things. You can treat it several different ways. I mean, some people say finders keepers. They say, you don't own said hillside or field. So, and yes, you put in the work, but you don't own the place. So we found it. We're going to continue to hunt it. So if that's the case, and so what I'll say with Los Angeles, it's a little bit different than San Diego or Riverside, or what I'll say is, if somebody's hunting our board lines, we're going to know, and we usually know who it is. But our board lines are very hard to have somebody else messing with them, hunting them, or doing anything without us knowing. And it's not very likely that people will find a lot of our board lines. But in most of our cases, it's all been within the family. I'll just say we haven't had a large problem with other people finding our board lines. We hide our materials really well. They're all really hidden and disguised. We've learned to put them in places where people aren't going to find them, where people aren't going to take the time we go the extra mile to kind of get them, into places where people just don't want to go traipsing and looking for stuff. But of course, we've had different times where somebody's come along and found our boards, and they've turned them in a few places. We've made the mistake of putting some stuff somewhere where it's just way too visible or whatever. And in that situation, we just basically, what we do is if it becomes a problem, you just pick them up and move them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those situations were just they were literally like beginning novice, like I don't even know if you'd want to call them herpers, or they were just, it might've been someone that knew something about herpetology, or just somebody that just knew you could flip something to find an alligator lizard or something, or maybe a snake. And they're literally taking our boards and flipping them completely out of place, and that kind of a thing. And it, what you find that like 2 times in a row, you find a whole line with that done. You just, what you do is you move it. And then there's been other cases where other people have found our stuff, and these are people that we know that are in our, let's just say, our sort of family, people that have shared information with us, that and some of the spots that we hunt, there's other people that know of these spots as well, and so occasionally your paths kind of cross, but basically to close that, in closing, to wrap that all up, as far as the morality thing, you're either, in my opinion, with herpetology, you're either moral or immoral. That's just my opinion. So we have people that have like fibbed about, I say fibbed, it's like a nice way to put it, but they've lied about like discoveries. Like I found this Rosie bow out in the desert at this spot when like everybody knows that they didn't, or they have proof that they were in like another state that day, or those types of things happen. Or like you said, if like this is the way we do it. If I go and explore some field somewhere, let's say it's in Los Angeles, let's say maybe it's in Orange County, which is not what I consider like my territory, even though I do occasionally go down there, and I find someone else's board line, I don't need to hunt somebody else's board line to either find what I'm looking for or to make my day like any better, whether what kind of king snake is under what board that might be there. Like I'm more happy just doing the work myself, and like we'll go down to Orange County and put our own board line down there if we feel that we want to check out a spot. But if I find a board line, this is the way I'll do it. And this is, if for anyone that happens to be listening, this is the way I call it. So you've taken time to traipse out into a field. Oh, maybe you think there's some boards over there. Like you had that intuition, right? Like that looks like a great spot where somebody could have set up a board line, or maybe I see something over there. And you've taken the time to traipse all the way over there. This is the way I call it. If you're a good moral person, you get your one flip right then and there, in my opinion. So you've taken the time to traipse all the way out there through the mustard, get all cut up. Now you find what appears to be somebody's board line. In my opinion, if you're like a moral person, you check it once right then and there. Because of course, you took the time to go all the way out there. Of course, you're going to inspect it, and who knows? There's board lines that people have set up that they've never even gone back and checked like 10 years later. So there's no way to tell it's this person's board line or that. So you check it that one time. And then from there, in my opinion, I don't know, you basically maybe keep an eye on it, see if it's being hunted, maybe try to find out, whose it belongs to if you're that plugged in, you know what I mean? But if it's something you can tell that somebody else is hunting it, that looks like the person that's placed it, I don't know. My whole thing is I just for myself, I'd much rather go do it myself. I'd much rather hunt my own boards, have my own spots that nobody else is hunting, and I have no problem finding that myself. Now, some people, they don't want to put in the work, or they just want something a little bit easier. They want to be pointed right to where something is, where you can go, look through something, look through a rock pile, a board line, or whatever. But that's basically it. It's with herping, it's an important thing to bring up is herping morals, and it translates beyond board lines and king snakes and things like that too. It goes right into populations of zonata and boas and certain rock piles and spots that get and I still think there's plenty of ground, and even if we're talking about urban king snakes in Los Angeles, there's still plenty of ground for other parties to come along and if people wanted to try their hand at it, and there's plenty of ground that could use a couple of extra pieces to turn and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But then again, like I said, it's not for everyone. So you're always going to have those people that want to just do it the easy way.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were on that, you nailed exactly what I was getting at. When we were down in Florida, the area that we went to was south of Lake Okeechobee. Pretty much anybody that does anything with Florida king snakes knows that that's the area you go to find Florida king snakes. I see Hub's book in the background there. I mean, he goes so far as to put a map and tell a story about going to Belle Glade and South Bay and Clewiston. And so that's where he went. And after reading, everything, and I'm a visitor there, so that's definitely not where I'm going to be herping every day, but we just wanted to see if we could find them. And then I had no intentions of taking them. The one we found alive, hopefully still slithering around the cane fields today. But when we were down there, you go out in the morning in March because they're out basking. And I had myself and the students who were in these canal banks, and we're looking. And when you were on their habitat, that area is herped by a lot of people. And I've probably in my herping career, when I've been doing that for about the past 20 years, I think I've stumbled on maybe 2 or 3 board lines. And in that week, like we were stumbling on 2 or 3 board lines an hour. It was like insane.
Oh,
like I've
wow.
never seen
Yeah.
this much artificial cover put out specifically for snakes. And we kind of had this conflicted moment of like, well, do we flip it? Do we not flip it? Like, what do we do? And I said, we're down here to find this animal, guys. We're going to flip it, but we're not going to like destroy it. So another aspect of this is like, if you actually do the flipping, you got to ask the question, am I going to take everything I find? I pray to God that's not anybody's intention that's out herping, because we want to make sure that, you know, we have a resource that's available to everybody. But the other big deal is what a board line is it's essentially you are creating microhabitats in a sea of undesirable microhabitat for the snake. So if you don't put the board back into the footprint of the board, you are eliminating those humidity gradients, the temperature gradients, the prey availability that the board line represents. I mean, I can tell you, we didn't flip any king snakes. We flipped a crap load of cotton rats, though. And every one of those cotton rats was a juvenile cotton rat that could have been food for a king snake. So the other part of this is just making sure that you respect the fact that, like you said, someone's put in that work. Don't just flip it lackadaisically to go blitzing through the line. If you're going to do that, you want to make sure everything's going back into that footprint, that you're sealing up that edge around the boards or the tires or the carpets, whatever it may be, tins, and that you respect the land, because, you know, if you don't do that, you can make an awesome board line crap. I know when I was in graduate school, we set up board lines for salamanders, not for snakes, over here in Appalachia. And we were setting these things up off of trails to see if salamanders would move across the walking path, because turns out a walking path to a salamander is like a gigantic desolate plain to a human being. But the cover board arrays were very close to where the public could be. And what ended up happening in a couple of situations is they produced a lot of salamanders until one person, Lord knows who it was, it could have been like a little kid that doesn't know any better, flipped the boards, and then they didn't put the boards back. And in that instance, 5 years worth of data.
I thought you were going to say that. You didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were going to say the kid stepped on it. Because that happens too. You know.
So anyway, so there's yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, okay, so you've had your banner day and you found, like, what, in your opinion, like when you find a Cali King and you decide, okay, you're entering my locality breeding group, what does the animal have to have? Is it and I know there's a continuum here, because for some of these locality, it could literally be, we don't have any and we found them, so you're entering the group. It could be on the other end of the spectrum, you know, we're looking for a specific demographic, a specific size, a specific sex. Like, just kind of talk about the process or what it might be when you're deciding, okay, I'm going to start a line of this locale. Yeah. What does that look like, and what do you take?
Selecting stock.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
So basically, for me, with Cal Kings, I definitely it's not like with a Rosie boa. I would say that's the way it is, as far as where you just said that, like, just because it's a new spot, we're going to keep it. Like, that's more, to me, is more of a Rosie boa thing. And as far as like the urban Cal King thing, and that's the thing where I consider obviously a wide number of different localities within LA. Whereas at one period of time, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, people might have considered all of LA one locality. But because of the current, the overbuilding and the way everything is hyper developed, and the way these habitats are fragmented and completely separated and no longer exchanging any gene flow. So we have several different localities picked out. And for me, let's just say you caught a abandoned animal, or somebody caught abandoned animal at like some field in LA that's like a spot where that's totally mind blowing or something, and it's just a spot where nobody else has found one. It's just some super urban spot, and somebody finds a king snake that's just normal. Like, let's say for myself, though, for my own collection, I don't necessarily need to start a new breeding line with that animal unless I know that there is either recessive Whittier gene there, because like I said, if you've got just two totally normal banded kings from Los Angeles and there's no Whittier gene present, you're basically just I've done a fair amount of breeding, and you're just going to basically produce those same fairly normal banded kings. There's not going to be too much that's going to pop out. The Newport gene is dominant, so you have to have a physical Newporter to start a line with that. So let's say that I knew that there was like a Whittier that was found in the area, or let's say I knew for a fact that Whittier gene was present. And when I say Whittier gene, that's that's basically also I'm going to go, I hope to go into that here with the podcast. I'm going to hope to go into kind of my definition, but if those that are familiar with Brian Hubb's book, you'll see the section on Los Angeles and Orange County, and it talks about Newport, the Newport Long Beach morph, which I'm sure much more people are familiar with. And a lot of people are familiar with the Whittier gene now too, but most people are calling it the mud gene, which is, I think a lot more people are familiar with the term mud morph. So basically the Whittier gene is, it's a hypermelanistic morph that of the cow king that pretty much almost exclusively exists in Los Angeles County. I want to say I've heard records. I've never actually seen a picture myself, so I can't say it's for sure, but I want to say there's stories of there's records of specimens being found in Orange County, but it's a morph that almost exclusively exists in the Los Angeles basin. What is specifically makes a Whittier morph? A Whittier morph basically has a very what is it? It has basically a very defining characteristic in the head marking, and the belly 100% of the time is a solid brown belly. So those are the basic rules for a Whittier morph. Is every single specimen that's ever been located, that's ever been produced in captivity. So we're talking totally about the Marina Del Rey line, which is the line that most people are familiar with. That's the line that Gary Kiesler started that line sometime in like the mid 2000s. And Don Huffman was the original finder of the stock. He was the original collector down in Marina Del Rey. And those were collected in, was between 2001 and 2004. Don Huffman found the very first specimens, let's say, that made it, that were properly kind of, because before that there was some specimens floating around. There was some guys in the 60s and 70s and 80s that had these specimens. At the time they were just calling them like dark, ugly kings. But kind of what I'm talking about is in more modern times where people were actually starting to properly identify these snakes and properly getting them into the hobby as like a locality type thing, instead of just what happened in the 70s and 80s and all the way back into probably the 60s was these guys like Lloyd Lemke or whoever, these different guys, Zweifel, I forget what his first name is, it's Richard Zweifel, was doing a lot of breeding, and he was a biologist and doing a lot of studies and breeding in the 1980s. And but they would take like a king that they caught in LA that was some weird, this is some weird hyper, and then but they wouldn't breed it like locality. They just take some San Diego king and they would try to breed out the gene and you know what I mean, that way. So what I'm saying is the Don Huffman specimens were really the first specimens that properly made it into like a locality style breeding thing. And it was Don giving the snakes over to Gary Kiesler. And then Gary took the snakes. There was both of the original snakes were females from what I remember. There was a banded animal caught from the field that I want to say, I don't remember the story correctly or not. It either was or wasn't het. If it was het, then they got the muds the first time, and if it wasn't, he had to to produce the hets and breed back. But he ended up getting these animals into production, where he was breeding, Whittier to Whittier and able to produce large clutches of them, and that's where they started making their way out into the hobby. And people were, at first it was people that just knew Gary that were kind of getting them, and then more and more it was like at the like Pomona Reptile Show and Anaheim Reptile Show. He would have his booth there, and they just kind of became more and more popular. So back to what makes a Whittier a Whittier, and the term mud I want to go into in just a little bit, because basically the case that I want to make, my theory with the Newports and the Whittiers is for me they're two completely different morphs, and for me it's undeniable. It's just because their markings are 100% consistently different, and the markings are always the same on a Whittier, and they're always the same on a Newporter. So a Whittier animal is an extremely dark hypermelanistic morph. One of the very first specimens that was ever found was the Whittier. There's a Whittier morph specimen in Brian's book that's from Friendly Hills Whittier, and I'm not sure the exact date on that one, but that snake exists in the LA County Natural History Museum in a pickle jar. And that snake was basically one of those, it was almost like a near, I would never say perfectly banded, because there's always usually some form of aberrancy, but it was basically a near perfectly banded Whittier specimen. So you imagine like a hypermelanistic banded king snake with an extremely dark head with a solid brown belly. But beyond that, we've, obviously going fast forwarding to the early 2000s, Huffman found this striped variety down in Marina del Rey. Since then, I've found one in Baldwin Hills that had a reverse stripe on it. So it basically had a kind of, basically a mosaic or reverse stripe section to it. And then basically we have another spot that's in the same vicinity near the LA International Airport, and we have found two specimens there. And one of the specimens was kind of like still what I would call more of a banded Whittier, but it was kind of a little bit more aberrant, but it was very highly kind of banded. And then we found another specimen that was almost perfectly banded, with these really interesting wedges of dark pigment like within the band. So it was almost kind of looked like if you've ever seen some conjuncta kings from Baja, kind of something similar. It was basically a really nice banded Whittier specimen. And so just to recap, as far as the Whittier gene, the Whittier king snake has a lateral stripe running basically above the lip and straight through the eye on the snake. Oh, cool. And that's basically a 100% consistent marking that I've seen on every single specimen. I've looked at all the animals that Gary's produced. I've seen a couple in the wild. I've been able to produce the LAX ones so far. Both of the ones that I've found have been babies, so it's taken a while to grow them up and get the project going. But yeah, they basically, it's a 100% consistent marking. It's an extremely dark head. The whole top of the king snake's head is extremely dark, and then there's like a very defining like horizontal or lateral stripe that kind of runs through the eye, right above the lip, right. So, and then basically you have a solid brown belly 100% of the time, and then like a San Diego morph or Central Valley morphs, the markings or aberrancies will continue right across the top of the tail. So a Newport morph, on the contrast, will have basically normal coastal Cal King head markings. So you just have that normal mask to it, right? But there's also occasionally a hypermelanistic Newporter that's found or either produced in captivity. And the hypermelanistic Newporter will have a head very similar to it if you're familiar with like a Long Beach Signal Hill King or any hypermelanistic, just a normal hypermelanistic banded king snake from Los Angeles, which has kind of just a broken up, basically instead of having that full mask, it has kind of just a broken up, tiger striping on the lip and kind of just broken up speckling. They have little mustaches on the snouts. And that's just very consistent with just a hypermelanistic banded that you'd find anywhere from Whittier to Long Beach to even up near Marina Del Rey or wherever. And then the most important thing about a Newporter is 100% of the time it has a chocolate top tail. So from the vent back to the tip of the tail on the dorsal, there's never any markings of yellow. There's markings of yellow on the side of the tail, but as far as the dorsal, every single Newporter, every single pure Newporter that exists within that gene, the chocolate, Brian calls it the chocolate top tail, but it really is it's a 100% consistent trait. And I'll even say further that I've pointed it out to a few people and it just kind of blows their mind when they really notice it. But when you really look at like designer stock and non-locality California Kingsnake stock, like you'll look at these animals with like they're just line bred or project bred for generation after generation. Nobody really knows the original source of the animals, but you've got some like high white king or possibly like a banana type king or just any of these various designer morphs, and you will see chocolate top tails on a fair amount of them. And of course, after years and years and years of line and project breeding, they're able to break that barrier, and you basically have an animal with solid markings instead of speckles like the San Diego that has markings on top of the tail. So it's like a Newporter with markings on top of the tail. They're able to break that barrier, but that chocolate top's tail is still a gene that will consistently pop out in clutches that are just have been in the hobby. These stock has been in the hobby for who knows how long. So it really is, in my opinion, Los Angeles is it's possibly one of the only counties that I can think of that actually has literally two completely different stripe morphs. Now, the interesting thing about that is, so for example, in Brian's book, and then Ross Padilla is also kind of one of the big, but Brian Hubbs is common Kingsnake book, and then Ross Padilla is one of the big authorities on the LA Kings too. He's got a website, and but let's take Brian's book for example. He kind of, if you look at his section, he kind of lumps them all together within the Newport group. And that's just kind of how he did it. He calls them a Newport Long Beach mud morph. But like I said, for myself personally, when you've caught a couple of these animals now in the wild, you've bred them, you've seen them bred by other people over and over again. I mean, like I said, you guys just look for yourselves. Start looking at some different pictures. I'd be more than happy to provide pictures of animals, but it's these traits are 100% consistent. The other thing with the Newporter is the Newport Long Beach morph does not have to have a solid belly of any kind. A lot of them just have checkered bellies, but they can also have a solid yellow belly. A lot of them have a solid brown belly, but the solid belly is not a required factor to make it that to be that morphs. To whereas because I've produced hypermelanistic Newporters from my Marina Del Rey stock that from 15, 20 feet away, they sort of look like a Whittier gene because it's an aberrant morph with that darker color. But like I said, the defining characteristics are there basically 100% of the time. Even with the hypermelanistic Newporter, you still always have the chocolate top tail, and it's basically got a head marking just like a Long Beach Grease King. And some of them have solid brown bellies, and some of them just have checkered bellies. So it's a different thing. Between the two different morphs. I'm not sure if there is any other. I was trying to think of that earlier. If there is any other cow king populations that have two definite striped morphs, and that's the way I look at it nowadays. But the thing that's, like I said, the thing that's really interesting about that though, is that basically, as far as all the research that I've done for the Los Angeles basin, where people have found things historically, the specimens that I know about, the specimens I know other people have found. Basically, Whittier snakes are found always in the vicinity or somewhere really near where Newporters are found, and vice versa. Like and it's the same thing with that hypermelanistic gene, that Grease King gene that we all know about, the Signal Hill animals. All of those snakes are all found within the Los Angeles basin, and they're usually, you can imagine with the city being gone, like let's just say when without any of that development, that that was all a related gene pool. But you really do have, you have at least 3 very distinct groups: the Newport, the Whittier, and then you have like a hypermelanistic bandit, if you want to call that like a third group.
Can we real quick, the Grease Kings? I actually have them.
Yes.
And I've been, so I'm all the way over here, East Coast, nowhere near California, never been to California. And everything I've read about them basically says that the locales that they came from have been wiped out and developed into parks and things like that. And I've always wondered, like, is that actually the case? Or is it, like, is that phenotype literally just in herpetoculture, or are they still, you can still find them in the Long Beach, I think it's Long Beach area?
So the phenotype is completely still exists out there.
All right, there you go.
Especially when you're talking about outside of that particular field.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you guys can all have a sigh of relief. No, they're not. Yeah. They're not destroyed yet.
You've done your civic duty.
Yeah. No, I mean, these animals are always completely under threat. Whether the city wants to make a place into like a manicured park, or they want to put a building and a parking lot on top of it, they never can seem to just leave these overgrown little side areas alone. There's always either a developer or the city, like you said, wants to get a hold of it in a public terms. For a lot of these areas, some of the other areas probably have a better future because they've been made into like proper wildlife reserves, like Marina Del Rey. But so as far as Signal Hill, they came in and they made that into like sort of what it was. So here's the history of Signal Hill is people have been collecting king snakes. I want to say they're possibly since the 60s, but certainly through the 70s, 80s, really heavily in the 90s. There was guys that were going there, like Brian Hines and Paul Lynham and different guys that were, I think Paul Lynham was one of the first guys to really get him into the hobby. And then I think Gary Kiesler was another person that was getting that into production. But basically they came in, gosh, I want to say it was sometime around 2010. Don't quote me correctly, but sometime about 10 years or more ago, they came in with this idea. At first, they were going to make it into the next sporting arena, and they had all these ideas with it. But they decided to make it into like a city park with like like hiking trails and that kind of a thing. And basically, what Signal Hill was before that was it's an old oil field, which is something that if you've been through Los Angeles, certainly in the Long Beach area, if anyone's familiar with that area, you'd be very familiar with that. There's as you drive through certain parts of Long Beach and lots of different parts of LA, but really certainly Long Beach, there's lots of different fields that are not developed per se, aside from the fact that they have these, what do they call them? Oil pumps and yeah. oil derricks and oil activity going on in them. These are oil leases. These are properties that are owned by oil companies. Some of them have no fences around them and you can just walk right into them. There's many, many more fields down there besides just the Signal Hill field itself. And I'll say that the Signal Hill spot was kind of they called it the Signal Hill spot, which was it's the particular field. And I have no problem really giving the exact information on that particular field because I know Brian Hines gave out the information years ago on Field Herp Forum when they first said they were going to develop it. And it is pretty much it's a spot that's very widely known, but it's off of Orange Avenue down there in Long Beach, and there's a cemetery that butts up to the west side of it, and the west end of the field was the really the area where a lot of the Kingsnakes came from, and that was really the only part of the property that had what you call like a proper field, if you will, to it with like a nice grass pack to it, proper soil content, and just the good rodent holes. It was like right behind the cemetery. There was this little area that was 50 yards by 50 yards, something like that. And that was kind of where a lot of the Kingsnakes came from. Yet there were people that, I remember finding a shed one time way on the forward part of the property, and people found kings in other parts of the property, but most of them came from right there. And what happened was the city started talking about doing these projects going into the late 2000s. And the first thing they did was they let this, it was this like, organic farming co-op people come in there. And where do they pick to set up their little farm? They literally plop them right in there, and they go right where the main field was, where most of the boards were. Most people had found them, and they started doing this farming thing. And then the city started coming in, and they had all these huge truckloads of like mulch that they they got from some, they were grinding up trees somewhere in the other part of the city. Now we got to dump all this mulch. Let's take it down to that. We don't want all those weeds and stuff growing down there at our new park. So we'll just dump a bunch of mulch out. So between that, there was this farm thing, and then they started coming in with these truckloads of mulch and just dumping it all over the field. And that was kind of like the beginning of the end. There was certain guys that were just like over it at that point. And then shortly after that, the city there's a hill just above that's all part of the same property. And the city came in and kind of put in a parking lot and like a little trailhead park area. And basically what they opened this oil field it was a place that was fenced in, with like a old rusty chain link fence. It was a place where in the mid 2000s you're basically pulling up and you're sneaking through a little hole in the fence to get into it, and they opened it up into like a public space now. And I would still say there probably is a pair or two of Getula. I'll just say that, probably still living within that property, even because it's a large property. There's just certain things. There's like huge concrete piles that just are never going to be moved, and just different. They have their preferred habitat, but they also have their habitat that they'll cling on to exist. So it's possible there's still a couple kings in there. There's also other fields in Long Beach. There's other fields that right in the area that could have snakes or there's other habitat in the area that certainly still has snakes, reptile life, and definitely Getula in the area.
So Daniel, I mean, obviously with some of our keepers, kind of connecting with natural history of the animals and, talking about some of their natural habitats, what is your preferential keeping of king snakes? How do you, in your collection, set up animals, temperature requirements? Because over the years, and this has come up multiple times with other people too, as well as, some of the temperatures of which we keep some of these animals is rather excessive in terms of keeping in private collections.
Yeah. Well, what I've found basically, temperature wise, where I've been keeping mine is I have really good luck lately, like just right around 85. Just because that's kind of what I've heard from most of the information I've gotten from other hobbyists and people that I talk to that have good success. That's a number that I hear thrown around. That's always good to try to at least attain that temperature, and then try to not go too far above that temperature. That's something that I've kind of learned, and I've had really good luck just keeping my thermostats right around there. Sometimes I'll bump it up a little bit. Other times of the year I'll bump it down a little bit if the house is heating up or things like that. but that's kind of the range that I've had really good luck in. I think they get good belly heat and are able to digest, and then at the same time you're not worried about any kind of like overheating, and really just having experience like just seeing them active in the wild, and you feel the rock that they're hanging out under or the whatever, and it's especially with the coastal cow kings, it's never really warm. They're not an animal that will really likes to tolerate a too high of a temperature. So you want to basically, like I said, mid 80s is what I try to keep them pretty consistent at throughout their period of activity for the year.
And do you keep in cages or are you keeping in rack systems? A little bit of both.
I do a little bit of both. I have some. I used to have more racks, but I have some like sweater tubs just with the lids, and I just do them that way because I don't have them set up with the rack system. But a lot of my stuff I try to keep in my own handmade aquariums, just because it's more just for a display factor for me. I just like basically I like the glass. So I basically, I try to go like a 25 gallon tank, something pretty good size for like an adult king. I try to go, at least 12, 13 inches wide, at least 2 foot long. And I have all my aquariums turned the sideways on the shelf where so I get my max storage on my shelf system and everything. Basically like you see a lot of old school like Rosie boa breeders. They're kind of similar to their setup, like Gary Kiesler or Randy Limber, kind of similar to how their snake rooms look. And basically I'll do some separation on the glass. I'll have like a vinyl visual barrier so the snakes aren't like they're not wasting extra energy, stressing themselves out, psyching each other out at being, right next to each other in the next cage over. That gives them a little more, they feel more, more secure, like they are in a rack system or a sweater box, and then basically I'll, basically just a large enough water dish for them to submerge if they want to. I'll do humid. I'll do like a humid box, like with a coconut, a bed of bees type thing, or that, for like a humid hide, somewhere in like the middle of the tank. And then I usually try to have at least 2 hides in there for them, and have the heat, completely on one side of the tank, but still plenty enough room for them to get right onto it. And like I said, here in Southern California, with the just keeping these animals within their part of the part of the world where they're from, and not just the same humidity, same everything. It's really they're very, very easy to keep. Just a basic. I use pine shavings bedding myself personally, because I think it's just, for me, it's softer. It's obviously softer than I like it better than like the aspen or anything like that. I always try to find a nice soft bedding. But I'll use a lot of pine shavings for just the bulk of my stuff. But I'll also do Betta Beast and do some more kind of natural setups and things like that, and just kind of have fun with it and that kind of a thing. But basically, my whole thing is to just get them at a good stable temperature. They can digest their food, be comfortable, and I just try not to stress them out too much. I don't hold my kings too terribly much. I do hold them. But the Rosie boas, if you don't hold them, they'll start biting you. But my kings personally seem to just be they like to just be kind of left alone, fed. I hold them every once in a while just to let them know that I'm there, and that's they really. I mean, everybody knows cow kings. They just, in certain parts of the country, it couldn't be really an easier snake to keep, in my opinion. Really,
feeding wise. What size prey item for like juveniles and adults, and then how frequent? Because there's actually a lot of information out there for people, because this is one of those beginner, snakes, but there's also some nuance to them. So, how's that? What's that look like?
there could be a range with that, but I mean, for me, the feeding size is much more important than really sticking to like a strict frequency. That's for me. That's more people that have they have the time, they have the money, and they want to grow the animals quickly and get them to breeding size. Basically, my animals, I'm feeding them basically once every week. Some of the bigger animals, I might feed them every 2 weeks, my big adults and stuff like that. But basically, it just starting with some of the hatchlings. You'll have really small hatchlings from some of my females. There's a certain female I have that produces a lot of eggs. She'll have like a larger clutch, but they'll be smaller eggs, and she'll produce a really small baby. A lot of those hatchlings will require a lizard or a lizard scenting process to kind of get them turned over with a really small pinky eventually, like a just a fresh born pinky, and you gotta scent them, you gotta wash them, you gotta do different things because these king snakes want to have lizards. Mm-hmm. They when they're some of them aren't. Some of them are when they're whatever, depends on the female or whatever it is, and especially a lot of it's the size too. But some of these babies are just basically pre-programmed, I think, for a lizard to be their first meal, which makes a lot of sense when you look at their habitat. But basically, it's just various size pinkies for the hatchlings until they grow. Until they get, I don't know, whatever size, but once basically I just go by the size of the like the middle portion of the snake. You're looking at once they start putting on a few inches, once you're getting them about you got them about 6 months down the line or so, that's when I'll start switching into more of like a fuzzy, like full time, and start pushing up the size of the fuzzy. But the king snakes I've seen can really they can handle a bigger meal potentially than other, especially like a Rosie bow or something. That's something where you really want to be a little more careful the size. And I've had that problem with king snakes too. Every once in a while you're not thinking correctly, and you'll give them something a little bigger than you should have, or whatever. You thought it was ready or something, and then it's regurged. But I don't have too many of those problems. It's pretty few and far in between. But yeah, they're basically just stepping up the prey size. I do not feed bigger than they can take, and I definitely don't. I'm not the person that has to feed hyper frequently, like every 4 to 5 days. For me, it's simply just because I don't have necessarily that time per se to do it that frequently, or the cost. I feed my animals enough for them to grow. They definitely grow, I would still say, at an above average rate than they would in the wild. And they hold weight really well too. That's another thing too, where like we were talking about with temperature, when you have the temperature dialed in properly, that they also seem to hold their body weight, much more stably, but yeah, it's basically just, like I said, all my adults are just on large mice. Okay. I used to supplement with like a rat pup. I give them a few rat pups in this from emergence from hibernation to give them that body fat. But I've been having trouble sourcing the rat pups lately. I'm getting my mice from a local friend of mine, so he's mostly just doing mice now. But yeah, it's just basically I do large mice, and if the king snake is a large king snake, I'll give it a mouse and a hopper, or maybe if something's really big, you give it 2 medium mice, or you bump it up if the animal needs something a little bit more than a large mouse, and I'll bump it up. But basically, like I said, with the temperatures dialed in properly, the animals they all seem to hold weight just really well.
So when it comes to breeding, to brumate or not to brumate, that is the question. Do you do any kind of brumation? Do you drop temps? I mean, you're literally living where the animals are, so you're the best guy on earth to tell us about this. And this has been a constant theme of our episodes as of late.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. I will mention that I no longer live in Torrance. I've lived up here in Canyon Country for the last like 10 years, which is like North LA. So I'm up here at like 1,700 feet at the down here near Soledad Canyon. It's like the foothills, the San Gabriel. So it gets a little bit cooler here than it would in Torrance, and it also gets a little bit hotter. I definitely hibernate my animals, brumate, whatever you want to call it. That's something I've been doing for many years. I think it's good for the health of the snakes when it's done properly. I think it definitely helps with the breeding. I don't think it does anything to harm your breeding propositions. I think it's only something that's good. So it's kind of just it gives you a break from the animals. You can shut down the electricity a little bit for a few months. And basically my thing that I've really got dialed in the last few years is I have a closet in my home that's a long closet. It's in a part of the house that doesn't get real warm, and it can be the doors can completely close, so it gets completely dark in there, and I'll basically package the animals. Some of them I'll even leave in their cage if I can move it, and some of the other ones I'll package into smaller containers and basically set them up to hibernate. I do leave water in there with them, a small amount of water with my animals, just in case they, because I've that's something I've always wondered about, and with my experience over the years, that's what I've done. And that if they want to move over and get a drink, and plus I'll check on the animals every, if I do 3 months of hibernation, I'll check on them like 3 times.
Okay.
I'll pull everything out like once every, like a month and a half in or a month in, I'll just pull everything out, make sure there's still a little bit of water in that nice clean dish that I put in there with them. And then the other big thing is too, obviously for hibernation, I'm sure this has been said many times before, but obviously making sure the animals have digested their meal 100%. So it's kind of, I'll even taper them off to a slightly smaller meal for that last meal. And I'll make sure they get a good 2 weeks, solid of proper temps, and make sure that they're completely, evacuated. And then from there, you're just slowly turning down the temperatures for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and till you get them down to hibernating. And it's worked out really well for me. It seems to, it just seems to be beneficial for the animal's health. There's no doubt that these animals are hibernating in the wild. They're really, what they're doing is they're brumating. So to perfectly mimic what they're doing, a lot of times in the wild, you'd have to pull them out of your closet slowly. But that's the thing, is you can't do that. You can't do that at home. You can only do what you can do. In the wild, they have the ability to, the weather will just change in the middle of the wintertime. Sometimes it get hot for a couple days, and like these Rosie boas or these Kingsnakes, they'll come up to the surface. And what's weird is you do find them with meals in them. Yeah. Like in January, occasionally it does happen. And so they have the ability to deal with it in the wild. To whereas you can only mimic it so much in your house. So you just put them down. And most of these years, these animals are down pretty solid. It's these weird years where the weather's weird, where they're coming up like for a day or two, and then going back down. So most of the time they're hibernating pretty solid for at least, 3 months or so.
What temps do you drop them down to? And when, month-wise, when would you start it? October? November?
I start in November. Okay. And I usually go, it's like a week before Thanksgiving, or usually the week of Thanksgiving, right around that time, because snakes are still pretty active in Southern California through October. Okay. So it's right around November. It just depends on what it is, but coastal cow kings for sure. I think I try not to put them down any longer than I have to. So it's November, and then I bring them up. It's usually like the second week in February. It just kind of depends on what the year's doing. If it's a really cold year where it's really dark and the temperatures are staying really cold, I might keep them down for an extra week or so. And then if it just looks like things are just warming up for the year, then I might bring them up in early February, but it's usually like a good 3.5 month hibernation that I do.
And is it?
And then go ahead, Zach.
Upper 50s, lower 60s, the temp that you're shooting for, or
I'm usually not able to get it to. I'm usually not able to sustain it anywhere in the 50s,
Okay.
but it will approach like 60 or maybe 59 sometimes at night during the coldest parts of the winter. But I'm definitely not doing anything special to try to artificially lower it or to make sure to trying to achieve that like 55 or 59 that would be nice to achieve. But for me, I just don't think it's necessary. And fortunately, like I said, where I live, once it gets into the wintertime, I'm not extremely high elevation, but I'm just in the right spot at the foothills here where it stays just cool enough. And if you put them in a closet, it definitely does not get out of the mid 60s.
Okay.
Pretty much the entire time. So that's basically my fail safe is when I'm looking for a hibernation spot is I'm just looking for a spot that I can close the doors and create a sort of like a cool pocket in the house. And my ideal thing is just to not leave 65.
Gotcha.
And when I reach in, like the closet, the outside of the cages will be like 65, but when you reach in and like touch the snake, it's usually that time of year in my closet. The snake's got a nice cool, it's got that cool cold feel to it, like it's hibernating and it's not very active. And that's just basically, like I said, I'm not super exact, but yeah, I do temp gun things and check and just make sure that we're achieving what we're supposed to, because you obviously once you get them back into the high 60s or towards the 70s, then they're starting to wake back up again and starting to metabolize again, and it's what you don't want.
And what about pairing up animals? I mean, typically, what's your approach for that? Are you waiting for the first shed? Are you waiting for a few meals in the animal before actually looking at pairing animals respectively? Or do you just wing it like I do?
No, I usually early on I was following a lot of Ross Padilla had a lot of information just specifically on what he was doing with his LA Kings. But I usually will wait for the first shed because that's just something I was told early on, and that seemed to work out for me. For me, I've never been in too terribly much of a hurry to just get them locked up and get them gravid. For me, I know some people have different reasons. They want to have them ready to go for later in the year to get them to a certain market or for a show or something like that. For me, I'd rather just take the extra time to make sure I put as much weight on them as I can. Definitely, I'll wait for the first shed. I've actually been doing a lot of my breeding over the years has been more in like late April. And we've bred a lot of Kingsnakes in May because that was originally what I'd heard from like Ross Padilla. He was having a lot of success doing that. So this is when I first tried breeding them like about 10 years ago. That was something that I tried early on. I was just following what he was saying worked for him with the same type of Kings. So yeah, I've paired them up in early May. I've paired them up all through April. This year, I'll be pairing some stuff up probably in the next week or so. I'll be pairing some stuff up at the end of March for the first time. And as far as what they're naturally doing, I'm sure in the wild, I'm sure they probably are breeding as early as March or late March. But I think definitely for this particular region, I would say April and even early May, possibly even later. They could be breeding because, like I said, these are areas along the coast. It can be much cooler than other parts of California. It's not like the desert or other areas. So they can really. I think these animals can breed. I'm sure they can breed into the summer too. I'm sure they're anything and everything can happen with Kings. And I from what I've heard and I think we've tried animals that haven't been hibernated that have bred, like somebody's, I got something, I do a breeder loan or maybe something didn't get hibernated that year. And they don't have to be hibernated to breed. That's been well documented. But yeah, it's, I think, the pretty consistent with what they're doing in the wild,
So, at what age you've had a successful clutch, eggs hatch? At what age are you breeding? Are you like, I've seen some references say with Lamprepeltis that if they're at breeding size at 2 years old, you can put them together, and then other people are like, no, they got to be 3 or 4 or 5. Do you have an opinion on that front?
I'm more, yeah, I'm definitely more the at least 3.
Yes.
But I'm more the 3, 4, 5 camp. I want to say I've tried 1 or 2 times jumping the gun and trying to breed stuff that I was really excited about. And obviously it not quite working out the way you want it to. Mm-hmm. The eggs, something's wrong with the eggs or the babies. So, maybe they're not fully developed or something like that happens. To me, those are the issues you run into when you breed a female of any type of snake too young, because it's like the same thing. Like my experiences with Rosie boas and cow kings, and that both things can happen when you jump the gun and you get too excited instead of just waiting another year or 2, just waiting till the time is right. That's more my approach, which is why it's I've been talking about a lot of my projects for so long, and they've taken so long to get off the ground, because I'm one of those guys that I'm willing to just wait till the time is right rather than try to jump the gun and get like 3 or 4 eggs that might not, you don't know what's going to happen with them. I'd rather wait till the animal's of a proper size and either get 4 really good, nice eggs, or get a larger clutch, or get, something like that.
Cool. And then incubating eggs, do you have a preferred temp? Strategy?
Yeah, pretty much just keep the humidity above like 30-40% for somewhere around there for cow kings. And I think the last couple of years I've been doing 81 degrees and just going with that, because I don't use a real complex incubator right now. I just have 2 of the Zoomed.
Yeah.
Like just 2 of those box incubators, and I just dial them in. I think you can go. They say you can go a degree. You can go a degree or so higher than that, but I keep it. I think I go right around 81 just to stay safe, and I just watch the humidity, and it's been pretty successful for me. I know you can bump it up a degree or 2, and I know a friend of mine, I know people that do that, and they'll hatch out, a week or a few days earlier. You can do that, but that's pretty much where I've been dialing them in at the last few years.
Cool.
Yeah, that's one of my preferences, is really incubate at lower temperatures, because the babies come out much larger, and especially with king snakes, I've had good success over in the past by doing that, and actually getting some of the kings to take pinks right off the bat, using like the lunch bag trick of taking the pink and putting the snake in, crumbling it down, and stapling the bag, because scenting lizards with pinks can always be troublesome too as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cause then it's all sorts of reasons, bringing mites into your snake room, and there's always something that comes with it. But yeah, I'm going to have to, in the future, I'm going to have to experiment more and talk to more people. Early on, it was when I first got into it, I would consult a few people that I knew that have done this for quite some time, like Gary Kiesler, and we've just we've had success with it so far. It's so far it's worked. A big thing for me that took a couple tries to really learn and or get the concept of too was getting the substrate, getting the vermiculite or the perlite, getting the right amount of moisture in there, not getting too much in there. And that's something that is also obviously really, especially with the cow kings too, because I don't know how, I'm sure it's the same way with any type of reptile eggs, but these this particular species, these eggs are not being laid usually in very wet. It's just a little bit of moisture that they're using at the end of the season and laying them. And then I think they're basically, a lot of times the soil is pretty dry, I'm sure, where they're being hatched out of. So I err on the side of drier now. That's the thing you learn. It's because why be wetter? That's just, you're just taking a chance of having problems with the eggs, whereas you usually don't have a problem with drier. And you can always add a little bit of moisture with a dropper or something. If that's just the thinking now,
All right. Well, I think we covered pretty much everything. This was great. This was our first locality episode.
Right on.
I really liked it.
Very good. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad I could come on and talk to you guys and help shed some more light on it. And I think you guys should do more of this. Brian Hubbs would be a good guy to.
We will be pursuing Mr. Hubbs.
Yeah, that I guarantee would be a good episode. So, but I'm glad I could come on and shed a little light on it.
Yeah. So, once again, thanks for coming on. If people have questions for you or want to reach out, maybe ask some questions about their kings. Maybe they have a king and they want to determine if you might be able to help them figure out what locale, or if it has any of those influences like that chocolate back tail or something to that effect. How can people get a hold of you?
They can find me on I'm on Facebook. If you find me on networking on Facebook, my email address is DandCruiser, DANDCRUISER @gmail. So they can contact me at DandCruiser @gmail if they have any questions. I'm trying to get sort of a brand with the Urban Kings up and running too. It's just something else. Just if you guys didn't mind, I'm just going to plug real quick.
Go for it.
I got my logo. I've drawn up like a logo, and we're just working on just kind of branding this. And I'm planning on getting set up at the reptile shows, the Pomona show,
nice.
Possibly the Anaheim show. Eventually having my own booth, and hopefully my goal is to have production years where I've got pretty much everything bred, and I've got new porters from different localities available. I've got Whittiers from different localities available, hets, hypermales, and people can come to said booth and they can talk with me. They can view all the babies and really see the differences in like what I'm talking about. And that's kind of my eventual goal, is to get this brand called Urban Kings and make it available to the public, because that's just what I'm all about, is just actually sharing what we've done and making it available and helping people with knowledge and to understand these really cool king snakes.
Badass. All righty. Well, it was a pleasure.
My pleasure was all mine.
Okay. And with that, thank you for listening. If you made it to this point, Matt and I would also like to thank the NPR Network for hosting our show. We have done that in the past couple episodes. We certainly want to do that. And then finally, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but I want to send a shout out to Phil Wolf, Nephris Initiative. He's part of Snakes and Stogies. He helped out my students and I when we were down in Florida. I got to meet him. It was fantastic. We had a good time in the field. If you need to get a hold of me for anything, you should know where to find me by now. You can hit us up on our Instagram and Facebook page for Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. And then you can find me on Facebook, Zach Loafman, and on Instagram, Dr. Crawdad, because of all the crayfish stuff I do. Matt, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. You can email me at matt@serpamitra.com or Facebook at Serpamitra and Instagram at Serpamitra USA.
All righty. So this was episode 12. We're trying to hold to our close to every 2-week schedule. Matt and I are finding time to do this in amongst our many, many travels. So hope to have one out in the next 2 weeks. No clue what we're doing, but we'll figure that out between now and then. So with that being said, thank you for listening, and we hope to have you back to listen to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Thank you all, and have a good one.